Imagine a night meant to seal love and power turning into one of the most scandalous spectacles in Roman history. The wedding of a Roman empress was never private. Every glance, every whisper, every move carried the weight of an empire. But on this night, instead of romance and ritual, the court witnessed humiliation, betrayal, and a shocking display that blurred the line between intimacy and politics. In ancient Rome, marriage was not just a union between two people. It was a performance for the state. Emperors used weddings to display wealth, authority, and control. Yet behind the veils, garlands, and banquets, darker truths unfolded. For one empress, her wedding night became less about vows and more about survival. Some sources claim she was forced into a public act of consummation. Others whisper of betrayal in the bridal chamber, while satirists painted her as both victim and villain. What really happened? Did her husband orchestrate the scandal to assert dominance? Was she a pawn in a cruel political game? Or were the rumors simply weapons of propaganda, sharpened by rivals eager to stain her legacy? Tonight, we step into the heart of Rome's most infamous marriage bed, a place where love was absent, but power was absolute. And by the end of this story, you'll see why one wedding night echoed across centuries, cementing the Empress's name not in romance, but in infamy. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, because the history of empires is never clean, never pure, and never what you think it is. Marriage in imperial Rome was never just about love. It was politics woven into ceremony, dynastic survival hidden beneath veils and garlands. For emperors and their families, weddings functioned as public theater, reinforcing power and displaying Rome's moral ideals, while often concealing private arrangements far less virtuous. In Rome's elite circles, women were political pawns as much as brides. An emperor's wife was not merely his partner, she was his legitimizer. Her bloodline could stabilize his claim to power, strengthen ties with noble houses, or placate the Senate. A carefully chosen union could mean the difference between an emperor accepted as ruler or dismissed as a usurper. This made the marriage bed a stage of empire, where alliances were consummated not just for heirs, but for authority itself. Roman weddings followed rituals steeped in symbolism. The bride wore the flammeum, a bright orange-red veil symbolizing fire and fertility. She was escorted to her husband's home in a ceremonial procession, greeted by torches and festive songs. The consummation of the marriage, though private in theory, was often shadowed by witnesses or gossiped about by courtiers, because a union left unconsummated could be annulled, threatening dynastic plans. It is within this world that we encounter some of history's most infamous women. Among them, few loom larger than Messalina, the third wife of Emperor Claudius. Young, striking, and ambitious, she entered the marriage as both an asset and a risk. As the daughter of a noble family tied to Augustus himself, her union with Claudius provided the emperor with a link to Rome's founding dynasty. Yet, according to ancient sources, her desires, both political and personal, often defied convention. On her wedding night, and in the years that followed, Messalina's story became entwined with whispers of scandal, betrayal, and shocking behavior that Roman historians recorded with relish. Whether every tale was true or embroidered by enemies, her reputation as both empress and seductress became immortal. What happened behind her veil was not only about Claudius's marriage, it was about the stability of Rome itself. This was the reality of imperial marriages. Beneath the ritualized smiles and ceremonial vows, each bride carried the burden of empire. And for Messalina, that burden would define her legacy in ways no wedding procession could disguise. The night of a Roman imperial wedding was never simply a private celebration between two newlyweds. It was a stage, a performance where the empire itself looked on. And when the bride was destined to be an empress, every gesture, every glance, every rumor carried weight that could either strengthen the throne or threaten to topple it. The day began with ceremony. Rome's finest families filled the halls, their togas brilliant white under torchlight, their expressions measured but restless. Musicians played soft hymns as the banquet unfolded, platters of roasted meats, baskets of figs, honey-drenched pastries, and amphorae of wine flowing freely. Senators and generals whispered in corners, courtiers watched every movement, and slaves scurried under the weight of golden dishes. What should have been a celebration of love was instead a spectacle of politics, a reminder that nothing in the emperor's palace was ever private. The bride, adorned in the flammeum, a blazing orange-red veil meant to symbolize fire and fertility, was the focus of every eye. Her hair, parted with a spear in the traditional style, glistened with jewels. To the Romans, she embodied purity, but to many in the audience, she was already a subject of speculation. Whose daughter she was, what alliances she brought, what enemies she might inflame. These questions hovered over her as tangibly as the scent of incense in the air. For Claudius the groom, the marriage was more than personal. It was political armor. Weak in stature and mocked for his stammer, he needed legitimacy, and his new empress offered it. Her noble bloodline tied him to Augustus, the founder of Rome's imperial legacy. Yet as goblets clinked and dancers performed, there were whispers behind the marble pillars. Some doubted her loyalty, others envied her influence. The marriage, still unconsummated, already sparked divisions. When the feast ended, the most anticipated moment approached, the transfer of the bride to her husband's chamber. The procession through the palace halls was marked by ritual. Guests carried torches, chanting ancient songs to ward off evil spirits. At the threshold of the bridal chamber, the bride was lifted across the doorway to symbolize her new life as mistress of the household. But unlike ordinary Roman weddings, this union was witnessed, scrutinized, and later recounted in the gossip-ridden corridors of power. And here lay the tension. In Rome, a marriage unconsummated was no marriage at all. The first night held enormous political significance, for only by confirming the union physically could dynastic promises be secured. In the case of Messalina and Claudius, or any empress and emperor, this was not a matter of affection but survival. Witnesses lingered close, attendants waited outside, and enemies sharpened their tongues, eager for any rumor of failure. Some ancient sources suggest that rivals already schemed against the bride, eager to exploit the slightest hint of scandal. A blush misinterpreted, a delay whispered about, a cry heard in jest, all could be twisted into political ammunition. Rome thrived on rumor, and a woman's reputation could rise or fall in a single night. For Messalina, stories would soon paint her as dangerously ambitious, lustful, and unfaithful. Whether these tales were fact or fabrication, they found fertile ground in the anxieties of this very wedding night. As the chamber doors closed, the banquet outside turned to speculation. Courtiers imagined scenes they could not witness, and each telling grew more sensational with every retelling. Was the empress unwilling? Was she too eager? Was the emperor humiliated, or was he asserting dominance? The truth may never have been clear, but the perception mattered more than reality. In the empire's eyes, the wedding night was not just the start of a marriage. It was the testing ground of an empress. And for this bride, the night promised not love, but survival. Every whisper, every watchful gaze, foreshadowed a legacy that would be remembered not for the vows spoken in daylight, but for the shadows cast in the imperial bedchamber. The doors of the bridal chamber closed, but in Rome, nothing behind closed doors remained secret for long. The marriage of an empress was too important to leave to privacy. What happened that night between Messalina and Claudius, whether whispered in truth or invented in malice, became one of the most notorious tales of imperial Rome. Ancient writers, especially Suetonius and Tacitus, painted Messalina as dangerously unrestrained. Tacitus describes her as insatiable, a woman whose desires ignored the boundaries of marriage, morality, and politics. Suetonius, more a collector of gossip than sober historian, delighted in recounting salacious details, never hesitating to blur the line between fact and rumor. Both men, though hostile, provide the fragments that shaped her legacy. According to one version, the wedding night itself was a humiliation disguised as ritual. Claudius, desperate to confirm his authority through his bride, may have demanded that the consummation be witnessed or attested by attendants, as was occasionally practiced in aristocratic Roman marriages. If true, it meant that Messalina's first night as empress was stripped of intimacy and turned into political theater. Instead of whispers of affection, there were whispers of scandal. A woman's body, offered not as a gift of love, but as proof of dynastic legitimacy. Another, more damning version suggested betrayal. Some ancient sources hint that Messalina, far from being a passive victim, manipulated her role, even directing her attention toward other men on that very night. Satirists claimed she was so bold that she entertained another lover while her new husband feasted outside, a story likely embroidered by her enemies, but one that stuck because it confirmed what Romans already feared about powerful women: that they were uncontrollable, dangerous, and capable of undermining emperors in the bedroom as well as in the Senate. Still others describe the wedding night as a drunken debauchery. Claudius, often portrayed as weak and foolish, was said to have indulged too heavily in wine. His vulnerability left room for ridicule, an emperor too clumsy to dominate his bride, paired with a woman too ambitious to be bound by chastity. To hostile commentators, the union was less a sacred moment of state and more a parody of Rome's ideals. What would it have felt like for the young bride herself? If Messalina was indeed little more than a pawn in Claudius's political game, her humiliation would have been profound. To be paraded, veiled, and finally displayed in a chamber where the empire waited for proof of her fertility. This was not a wedding, but an ordeal. And yet, if the rumors of her defiance were true, then perhaps she entered the chamber with her own designs, already planning how to twist her position into influence. The night could have been terror or triumph, depending on which account you believe. For her family, the scandal was equally charged. A noble lineage tied to Augustus himself, they may have hoped the marriage would restore their prestige. Instead, the gossip surrounding the wedding night turned their daughter into a figure of suspicion. In a society obsessed with pudicitia, female modesty, chastity, and decorum, Messalina's supposed transgressions were devastating. To break those ideals was not merely personal shame, it was political chaos. Why was this night so scandalous? Because it violated Rome's deepest expectations of women. Roman matrons were celebrated for loyalty and restraint. The Empress, above all, was supposed to embody the ideal of a faithful wife, silently dignified, a mirror of Rome's strength. To see her instead described as promiscuous, unrestrained, or manipulative struck at the very image of the empire. If the Empress could not be controlled, what did that say about the emperor himself? In truth, the lines between reality and rumor blur hopelessly here. Tacitus, writing with political agenda, emphasized Messalina's depravity to highlight Claudius's weakness. Suetonius, collecting anecdotes generations later, preferred the scandalous version of every tale. And later writers, eager for drama, only magnified the story further. What likely began as whispers about Claudius's awkwardness or Messalina's ambition grew into a myth. A wedding night so shameful that it poisoned the Empress's reputation forever. For Rome's political class, the scandal was both entertainment and ammunition. Rivals of Claudius whispered that his new wife would destroy him. Courtiers gossiped that the union was cursed from its very beginning. And senators, resentful of imperial dominance, saw in Messalina's supposed lust a metaphor for the corruption of the empire itself. In the end, it scarcely mattered what truly happened on that wedding night. The stories were repeated so often, sharpened by so many hostile pens, that the perception became reality. The young empress was forever branded by it, her chastity questioned, her loyalty doubted, her power feared. And that is the tragedy of Messalina's wedding night. Whether she was a victim, a manipulator, or simply misunderstood, the empire never allowed her to be anything but scandal incarnate. The morning after Messalina's wedding night, the palace was already humming with whispers. In Rome, scandal moved faster than official proclamations, and every rumor about the empress was sharpened into a political weapon. Courtiers who disliked Claudius seized on the gossip, painting him as weak and incapable of controlling his own household. If the emperor could not command his wife, how could he command an empire? For Messalina, the consequences were double-edged. Some accounts suggest she gained a dangerous kind of notoriety, her boldness marking her as a woman unafraid to bend imperial expectations. Others argue she became an easy target, her reputation as unchaste allowing rivals to discredit her influence before it even solidified. Either way, she was no longer simply Claudius's bride. She was a figure of controversy. Beyond the palace walls, satirists and street poets transformed the scandal into public entertainment. In the forum, gossips laughed that Rome had gained a new empress but lost its virtue. For senators wary of Claudius, the tale served as propaganda, proof that the emperor's reign began in disgrace. The wedding night, whether exaggerated or not, set the tone for Messalina's entire legacy, a union remembered less for dynastic power and more for whispered shame. The scandal of Messalina's wedding night clung to her name for the rest of her life. What may have been a single night of rumor grew into a legend of unrestrained lust, feeding a narrative that Roman writers eagerly repeated. For Claudius, it undermined his authority, reinforcing the image of a ruler manipulated by his wife rather than commanding her. For the empire, it cast a long shadow over imperial marriages themselves. What should have symbolized dynastic stability became, in the public imagination, a stage for excess and moral collapse. Later historians like Tacitus and Juvenal exaggerated the story, turning Messalina into a cautionary emblem of Rome's decadence. Modern retellings, from Renaissance drama to Hollywood film, have only deepened that image. Fact and fiction blurred until the Empress herself became less a person and more a symbol, the woman whose wedding night defined her as Rome's most notorious bride. From the very beginning, Messalina's wedding night was never truly her own. It was not a moment of love, but of performance, a stage where Rome measured the strength of an emperor and the obedience of an empress. Whispers in the dark chamber became weapons in the daylight, shaping not only her reputation but also the perception of Claudius's rule. In a city that thrived on scandal, her body became political currency, her intimacy transformed into propaganda. This story is more than a tale of one woman. It reveals a Rome where the private and public blurred, where power was built not only in the Senate, but also in the bedroom. The empire's glory rested as much on rumor as it did on marble. History reminds us that in Rome, even the marriage bed could be a throne or an execution ground. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden lives behind history's grand empires, subscribe and join us as we uncover more scandals, secrets, and voices long silenced. Your support ensures these forgotten stories are told, not erased.